The report highlights their mother's words. They were killed because they were successful. That's
Uh,
not just grief talking, is it? It feels like an indictment, a direct accusation against a system.
which brings us to a really key point that came up in the comments in this video. And the timeline. We had listeners like Clomeister06 asking, the live video is old, it's not recent, people are making it look like it's recent. Good question. And Adele asked sharply too, this live was made in April, so how is this video his final words? And you know what? The community is absolutely right to question that. It pushes us to be sharper. So let's be really clear. You are right. That video, it's old, from back in April. So if you mean literal final words, the very last thing he said, then no, it wasn't.
Right. And that distinction is important. But does the date make it less significant? I'd argue maybe it makes it more significant. What's fascinating here is instead of final words, maybe we should think of it as his final warning. Imagine getting everything you ever wanted. Working up from nothing, beating the odds. Now imagine that very success puts a target on your back, makes you a threat. It sounds like a movie plot, but it's a chilling reality for some. And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission is to unpack a really powerful investigation from Street Talk, the investigative journalism platform. It's called Success Written in Blood, the Beck Brothers' Story. We're trying to understand the tragic paradox of Tevin and Keagan Beck's lives and their deaths in South Africa, and really unravel what Street Talk found behind this whole thing. What's so unsettling is how their rise, which, it should have been a total triumph, ended up being the very thing that destroyed them.
Exactly. We tend to celebrate success, right? So we see it as proof of hard work, talent, just purely good. But Street Talk really challenges that simple view, especially when you look at certain communities. Tevin and Keagan Beck, the investigation shows they weren't handed a thing. They came from, well, real poverty, showed incredible hustle, grit, and this fierce loyalty to each other. They built a life in a place where just getting by, never mind getting ahead, is a daily struggle. On the surface, yeah, their story should be inspiring.
And it was inspiring to many people, but then the end. Street Talk puts forward this deeply, deeply unsettling idea that in some places, success doesn't just get you noticed, it actively paints that target on your back. It's a stark example of ambition and violence being linked in this disturbing way, especially within the, complex and often brutal world of South Africa's informal economies, the underground networks. This isn't just a true crime story, it's reflecting something much bigger about society.
And what's fascinating is how Street Talk actually breaks down the specific ways success makes people vulnerable. The report doesn't just say, oh, success is dangerous. No, it points to three key things with the Beck brothers. First, their growing influence. It likely stepped on toes in the established illicit economies, disrupted power, disrupted profits. Second, their independent success, coming up on their own, might have made existing power brokers, the ones who rule through fear, look weak or ineffective. And third, well, simple greed. Their wealth, their respect, it just attracted predators, people who wanted what they had without doing the work.
Okay, so it's not random. It feels very calculated. That forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth the investigation brings up. The report highlights their mother's words. They were killed because they were successful. That's not just grief talking, is it? It feels like an indictment, a direct accusation against a system. So what does Street Talk tell us about these silent power structures, this underworld that could feel so threatened by two brothers just making it?
Right. Street Talk makes it clear these silent power structures aren't some vague concept. They're often a tangled web. You've got local gang leaders, maybe corrupt officials, even some legitimate business types who use violence or threats to keep control, maybe maintain monopolies on illicit trades. When the Beck brothers started doing well, they weren't just earning money, they were building their own power base, respect. They were operating outside these established, often predatory networks. And that kind of independent success, it's seen as a direct challenge, not just to money, but to the authority, the control of these entrenched figures.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about social control, economic control, not just random violence. The Street Talk report mentions rumors, whispers after they died. And it talks about this heavy silence in the community. Why? Why does the investigation say communities often just retreat into silence after something like this instead of, demanding answers?
That's a really critical point Street Talk digs into. The silence. It's not indifference, not at all. It's driven by fear, deep-seated fear. And that fear is actually a tool used by these power structures. The report shows that when people like the Beck brothers are taken down, the community doesn't rise up because they're terrified of being next. Silence protects the perpetrators. It lets them operate without consequences. Witnesses won't talk. Justice doesn't happen. It feeds this cycle where fear is the currency. It keeps mouths shut. The community knows things you see, but the risk of speaking out feels way too high.
That calculated suppression.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really hits hard. Street Talk mentions a rule they follow when investigating these kinds of tragedies. Follow the benefit.
Yeah.
So who actually gains from Tevin and Keagan being gone? What kind of people does the report suggest usually benefit in these situations?
Yeah, that follow the benefit rule is key to their analysis. Street Talk points to a few groups. First, obvious ones. Direct rivals. People in the same line of work. If the Becks were maybe cornering a market, getting too much clout on a certain turf, well, removing them clears the way for competitors. Simple as that. Second, you've got the established kingpins or syndicates. Their authority was challenged because the Becks were rising independently, outside their control. Success outside the hierarchy threatens the hierarchy itself. A third, maybe the ugliest part, is just pure envy and greed. And while people demand more from the system, the community itself isn't just waiting around. They're digging into the info they do have, challenging things. Which brings us to a really key point that came up in the comments in this video. And the timeline. We had listeners like Clomeister06 asking, the live video is old, it's not recent, people are making it look like it's recent. Good question. And Adele asked sharply too, this live was made in April, so how is this video his final words? And you know what? The community is absolutely right to question that. It pushes us to be sharper. So let's be really clear. You are right. That video, it's old, from back in April. So if you mean literal final words, the very last thing he said, then no, it wasn't.
Right. And that distinction is important. But does the date make it less significant? I'd argue maybe it makes it more significant. What's fascinating here is instead of final words, maybe we should think of it as his final warning. Think about it like a fuse. The fuse gets laid way before the spark actually hits the powder keg, right? These grudges, threats, this reckless talk Tevin was apparently involved in, that stuff doesn't just pop up overnight, it builds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The streets, they have long memories. So the date doesn't make the video irrelevant. It makes it a key piece of a puzzle that was being assembled for a long time. It shows Tevin was talking about a past, a history, something that was catching up to him, maybe a street debt, like some comments suggested. These informal justice systems where debts get collected outside the law, they run on their own clocks. That live stream, it feels like a ghost of a war that was still going on, a really chilling piece of evidence that points to a much bigger story leading up to these debts. It's like an echo from a conflict that finally boiled over.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? What does it all mean? When you piece it all together, the evidence we have, the raw comments from you, the community, the street talk, it all seems to point to one kind of ugly truth, what the community calls the streets coming to collect on a debt. That's not just a phrase. It's this chilling realization that this wasn't random. It feels personal, like a consequence.
A culmination.
Yeah, exactly. Not a random hit, but the end result of something deeper, darker. And getting that insight straight from the people living it, that's incredibly powerful and painful. So for this deep dive, what's next isn't about finding some secret news source. The answers, or at least the threads, seem to be already out there. It's about amplifying the voices we already hear. It's about keeping those uncomfortable questions alive, the ones maybe nobody else wants to ask or dares to. We need to keep dissecting every comment, every theory, all the information that you, the community, are sharing, because it feels like the only way to get any kind of justice for Tevin and Keagan is to keep making noise, keep talking, keep questioning.
And that really speaks to the power of collective intelligence, doesn't it? Especially when the official channels go quiet or seem slow. When the formal investigation stalls, the insights from the community, they become invaluable. It's in this shared conversation, this refusal to just let it go silent, that real understanding can actually emerge. It shows incredible resilience, really. A community refusing to let a tragedy just fade away and instead actively trying to piece together the truth from their shared experience and knowledge.
So this deep dive, it isn't over. Not by a long shot. It's just getting started. It's just getting real. And it's powered by you, our listeners, our community. Thank you for joining us on this. It's difficult, but it feels essential.
And maybe, as you think about all this, consider how societies actually manage this balance.
Yeah.
That immediate personal need to mourn in peace versus the wider public demand for justice. How can those two essential human needs really coexist, especially when, like here, there's this idea of a debt from the streets involved. What does that tension tell us about the invisible structures, the unwritten rules, the sort of parallel justice systems that operate when formal justice seems, well, absent or ineffective? It's a question that pushes us beyond the headlines, I think, into the real heart of how communities cope and how they fight for their own version of truth.